Welcome to Psychic Insights, where pop culture meets higher consciousness and the tea is always a little bit mystical. I'm Robin Richardson, your psychic girlfriend, and around here we don't just watch the drama unfold, we read the energy behind it, whether it's celebrity scandals, reality TV, chaos, or true crime with a twist. I'm tuning in to bring you the intuitive scoop the headlines miss. So buckle up, because your aura's about to get entertained. Welcome back to my channel. It's Robin Richardson, your psychic girlfriend. And if you're new here, welcome, and welcome back to all of my other followers and subscribers. I really appreciate your support. And if you would do me a solid, like and subscribe and do all that stuff. And comment. And if you choose to, please be kind, because I read all the comments. All right. We're doing something a little different, so buckle in, all right? We're taking two cases that are completely different. They're unrelated, and we put them side by side. One is the Laura Owens case, our girl Laura Owens. And I've been following her for, forever, since the beginning. And I thought this is kind of where the true crime spiritual inquiry started, was with our dear Laura. And she is involving, allegedly, fake pregnancies, fraudulent schemes, perjury, all sorts of things. 14 felonies in a case in Maricopa County, Arizona. And the other is Mackenzie Shirilla. And she's a young woman from Ohio serving a life sentence after a crash that killed two young men, Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. And at first glance, these stories don't belong in the same conversation. Different ages, different circumstances, way different outcomes. But the more I sat with them, the more I kept asking myself, what if they're actually telling the same story? Now, before we begin, let me give my standard disclaimer. Everything shared today is my opinion, intuitive interpretation, analysis of some public information that's available, and this discussion is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Everyone discussed in this episode is presumed innocent of criminal allegations unless proven guilty in a court of law. So we're not here to determine the guilt. We're here to examine patterns, because patterns, frankly, fascinate me. And often there's some things that we miss, because they do reveal things. And one pattern that kept showing up over and over again is a desperate need to control the narrative, a powerful attachment to identity, and a belief that if you can get enough people to believe your version of reality, reality itself might change. So grab your coffee, tea, iced tea, bourbon, wine, whatever it is, because we're going to dig a little deeper today. One of the things I find fascinating about both these cases is the relationship with attention. Not fame necessarily, but attention, validation, visibility, being seen, being important, being the center of a story. Now, let's be honest. Most people enjoy attention. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be recognized. But there is a point where attention stops being enjoyable and starts becoming necessary, where it becomes oxygen. And that's where things get interesting. And when I look at Mackenzie Shirilla, what stands out to me is how much image appears to matter. Even after the crash, there were social media posts, public-facing activity, attempts to maintain a version of normalcy that many people struggle to understand. The public response wasn't simply outrage. It was confusion. People kept asking, why does this feel so disconnected? Why doesn't her behavior match the circumstance? And then we have our girl Laura Owens. Different story, different setting. But I see another person who spent years building a public identity. Her podcast, blogging, her chicken soup for the soul, her TEDx talk, the one that should be taken down. Her content creation, her creating a narrative, her telling a story, managing perception. And when that narrative began facing scrutiny, well, the response wasn't retreat, it was escalation. More explanations, more filings, more Medium blogs, more claims. more attempts to regain control of the story. And what fascinates me isn't whether these women are identical, because clearly they're not. But what fascinates me is both stories seem to revolve around the same question. What happens when being seen becomes more important than being known? Because those aren't the same thing. Being seen is performance. Being known requires truth. And here's another pattern that kept showing up. Medical narratives. Again, I want to be really clear here. Real illnesses exist. Real medical conditions exist. Real suffering exists. This isn't about dismissing any legitimate health issue. But what interests me is the role medical narratives played in both of these stories. In Mackenzie's case, discussion emerged around POTS and whether a medical event contributed to the crash. In Laura's case, pregnancy became the centerpiece of the entire legal narrative. And what strikes me is how powerful these stories become. Because the moment someone appears vulnerable, our natural instinct is compassion. Most people don't want to question someone who appears to be suffering, which is why I think Laura has used that a lot. Most people don't want to challenge someone who appears vulnerable. And that's what makes these narratives so powerful. When sympathy enters the room, critical thinking often leaves through the back door. And one of the questions that I keep asking myself is, when someone feels unseen, do they seek admiration? And when admiration isn't available, do they seek sympathy? Because both accomplish the same thing: attention, focus, energy, validation. And if someone is starving emotionally, any form of attention can start to feel like nourishment. So let's talk about the part that honestly is the most fascinating between these two, is the families. Because neither of these stories exist in isolation. They're the parents, supporters, defenders, people who step forward and say, wait, you're not seeing the whole story. And that's understandable. Most parents would walk through fire for their children. Most parents would defend their children, and most parents would want to understand. But sometimes love becomes complicated. Sometimes protection becomes enabling. And sometimes helping someone avoid consequences prevents them from facing reality. When I watch interviews involving Mackenzie's family, I see people who genuinely believe another version of the story deserves to be heard. I see the grief, I see the pain, I see the frustration. But I also see tremendous resistance. Resistance to what actually happened, resistance to the outcome, resistance to the public perception. And when I look at Laura's family, I see something similar energetically. Not necessarily the same facts, not necessarily the same motivations, but the same impulse to protect, to explain, to support, to defend. And here's the uncomfortable question. At what point does helping someone become helping them stay stuck? Because that line exists, and it's often incredibly difficult to see when you're inside it. So I pulled my cards because, I like that. And I hope you do too. So let's see what they wanted to add, because as always, this isn't evidence, and it's not a legal conclusion. It's simply a symbolic tool to help us explain energetic patterns underneath the circumstance on the surface. And sometimes documents tell one story and energy tells another. So let's see what comes through. So the first question that I asked was, what is driving the public media campaign around Mackenzie Shirilla? And what I got was bear, moon, whip, and clover. And immediately we get the bear will jump out, right? The bear is protection. Sometimes it's the mom, right? It's authority, it's power, it's control, the instinct to defend. And then we move to the moon. To the moon. Where's my moon? Okay. And this is reputation, public image, how others see us, how we're remembered. And you put these two together, and I immediately see a family deeply invested in public perception. Not necessarily because they're deceptive, but because perception matters enormously to them. Sound familiar with the Owens too? Then comes the whip. Okay? The whip is conflict, repeated arguments, defensiveness, the need to keep fighting, the inability to stop revisiting the battle. And then we have Clover. And that's hope, luck, a lucky break, a miracle, a chance. And what these cards suggest to me is a family system that still believes there's a pathway in changing the narrative. A belief that one more interview, one more explanation, one more conversation might create a different outcome. But here's what's interesting. The cards don't feel peaceful. They feel exhausting, almost like fighting against the current that is stronger than you. And the energy keeps saying, let go. And I've been saying this in my other episodes with Steve Shirilla. It's like, back off, let go. And the response keeps being, not yet. Okay, so let's talk about what is happening beneath the surface for Laura's family. All right, what did I do with them? Okay. And what we get is another heavy reading. We get the stork. We get the coffin. We get the book. And we get the anchor. All right, and this is heavy. The stork wants movement. It wants progress. Okay? It wants evolution. It wants forward momentum, but it runs directly into the coffin. Okay? It runs directly into the coffin. And to me, this feels like an ending that can't be avoided. Something that once appeared capable of growth, reaching a permanent stop. And then we have the book. The card of hidden information. Things not yet revealed. Things people know but won't discuss. Private records. And then we have the anchor. And I think a lot of this book is evidence that has been compiled that is in the court case. And for those of you who don't know, Laura has been offered a plea deal. We don't know if she's going to receive it. We should know this soon. And then we have the anchor, which is commitment, loyalty, attachment, being unable to move. What fascinates me about the anchor energy is it can either be beautiful energy or destructive. It can represent devotion, or it can be chained to something that no longer serves you. And the question I keep hearing is, when does loyalty stop being love and start becoming fear? Because sometimes we stay attached to a story because letting go would require us to admit things we don't want to face. And that's what the card feels like. An enormous struggle between truth and attachment. And we've been talking about this all along with Laura Owens and her family. And we see it in how they behave, right? All right, so then I had the third question. What is the deeper spiritual lesson these cases are teaching all of us, which is kind of interesting, right? We have the ring, we have the stars, we have the tower, and we have the cross. And this is interesting. The ring is the contract, the cycle, the family pattern, the thing that repeats. And stars is the dream, the idealized version, the story that we want to believe, the story we want to believe, the vision we create for ourselves. And then comes the tower, status, institutions, authority, public standing, and finally the cross. The burden, the lesson, the thing that cannot be avoided forever. What I hear these cards saying is you can build a beautiful story, you can build a public identity, you can build a reputation, you can even build an entire life around that story. But eventually reality is going to ask one question: is it true? And if the answer is no, the structure begins collapsing under its own weight. Not because the universe is cruel, but because truth seeks alignment. Truth wants integrity. Truth wants reality. So I pulled some clarifier cards because I like to do that. I got the heart, the dog, and the rider. Because the story doesn't end with the cross. The next cards, the heart, the dog, the rider, this changes everything. Heart is authentic connection. Dog is loyalty. real loyalty, not loyalty to a story, not loyalty to an illusion, loyalty to truth. And Rider is the messenger, the arrival, the breakthrough, the revelation. And to me, these cards say something beautiful. When illusion finally falls away, healing can begin. When defensiveness ends, truth arrives. And when reality is accepted, freedom becomes possible. Truly, I think this is more for the case of the Shirillas than it is for the Owens. But eventually, truth will be something they have to face as well. And the reasons I find these cases fascinating isn't because of Laura, and it isn't because of Mackenzie. It's because they hold up a mirror for us. Every one of us has a story about who we are. Every one of us has an image we're attached to. Every one of us has moments we want to control how others see us. And the question then becomes, what happens when reality changes that story? Do we adapt or do we double down? Because that's where the real lesson lives. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you see common themes between these cases? Do you think family systems can sometimes make situations worse while trying to help? And what role do you think validation plays in modern culture? Drop your thoughts below. Make sure they're kind. I appreciate it. And if there's any other cases you'd like me to compare, let me know. I'd love to do it for you. So, if you enjoy deeper dives like this, where we blend intuition, psychology, spirituality, and real-world events, make sure you're subscribed. And until next time, make sure that you keep your energy clean, your heart open, and remember the truth doesn't need perfect marketing. The truth eventually speaks for itself. And I'll see you in the next one.